I'm Aravind Swaminathan. I'm a partner at Orrick, Sutcliffe in our Seattle office, and I'm part of our cyber privacy data innovation practice group.
I'm David Dunn. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Kroll, and I've been there for about 8 years. Prior to Kroll, I was the Director of Incident Response for FIS Global, and I had about a 2-decade career in law enforcement before that.
So Dave, I want to start in a place that's where the CISO community is changing, right?
Sure.
So I think traditionally, right, the CISO's responsibility was to protect the corporate network, right? And that's obviously changing as we have more SaaS services, more products in development where security is a big part of it. Just talk to me a little bit about that balance. And, I'm interested in your views on, is it a good idea for the CISO to have both roles? Should they be split? Let's talk about the pros and cons of that.
Sure. I think that it's important that a CISO has heavy involvement in the product side. When you look at what it takes to secure an organization, it's not just the hardware and the infrastructure, it's the data. That's what so many organizations possess. Those can be the crown jewels, and it's the area where there's the most risk, both from a compliance, privacy type of an area. So if a CISO isn't involved in those aspects of the business, you're going to really have, I think, a hard time.
Okay, so let's get a little bit deeper on that. So as you're moving from one role to the other, what are the challenges that a CISO is going to have in going from understanding the corporate environment and then moving to the product side? And what should they be most focused on?
Understanding how a business makes money. Like the number one thing that a CISO has to think about is how does an organization generate revenue? Because you can secure the borders and do that at a certain price point. But to support product, to support application, you have to have an understanding of how they generate revenue so that you can support them. You have to be a supportive CISO who's engaged with the business.
And so are there technical limitations that sort of like the CISOs of yesterday will have in making that transition? Or is it really more of a business aspect to their experience that is really going to be where their challenge is?
I think it's the business aspect, right? You can have a very, very technical CISO, and there are many of them that are out there that are very good on the technical end and have a hard time taking their fingers off the keyboard. And you could have the other side of the board, which is the compliance CISO. This is just worried about your ISO, your SOC certification, sometimes privacy. And then you can have the business CISO who's, and a lot of times that's actually called a BISO, or a business information security officer. And that person is really focused on the supporting the security needs of the business. But I think for a well-rounded CISO, these days you have to have all three skill sets.
Okay. So if I'm part of the C-suite, let's just say I'm the CEO for a second, and I'm trying to make the decision on whether I wanted it to be combined into one role or bifurcated into two roles, what do you think CEOs or the C-suite should be thinking about as they're making that decision?
I think the number one thing is how technical do they want to be, right? So if you're the C-suite, if you're the CEO and you're going to bifurcate those roles, that's fine. You can do that, but you need to make sure that you're now the coordinator of security as a CEO, right? You're going to have your infrastructure CISO, and you're going to have to understand how that person deals with infrastructure. You're going to have your business CISO, and you're going to have to understand how that works. And I think there can be challenges with ensuring that all of the pieces are functioning well and working together well.
Okay, so if you want to take yourself out of that role, you can unite these two responsibilities, right, and have them live under essentially one person.
I would actually call it three responsibilities. There's the compliance side, there's the business side, and then there's the infrastructure side.
Okay, so let's talk about the downsides of now combining those roles, right? So what is the downside if you have that role living under one roof?
It's a lot. I think the downside is finding somebody who can organize and manage that effectively, because it's three very, very different disciplines that require different skill sets, right? You've got to have your person that doesn't have to be the most technical person in the world, but understands the technology and can lead and direct and empower your sort of technology or engineering side of the CISO organization. You've got to have somebody who's business focused, who can talk to your business leaders, who can talk to your product people and get them to buy into security. Like security is sales a lot of times, is being smart enough to be able to sell security to the business unit so that they understand the importance and the consequences of not doing security correctly. And then you've got the compliance side where you've got to have somebody who can honestly talk to auditors and give them the comfort and confidence that you guys are doing things correctly.
So we're seeing a lot more CISOs that have this product responsibility becoming evangelists for the product and becoming part of the sales team, right? And so they're on the front lines talking to customers, and talking about the value proposition of what the product or what the service is, right? From a security perspective. Like, so where are the pitfalls in that? Like, what do you worry about in that perspective, or what should you be thinking about if your role is going to migrate into that, where you're actually being asked, like, we want you to go talk to customers, we want you to evangelize our products?
Well, I think a big part of why that's happening is because you're seeing sort of that shift in risk from just the product owner to now the customer, if they have, all of the GDPR data controller, data owner, all that stuff. So customers are expecting a much higher level of security engagement in that sales process. The risk from a CISO is not getting it right. It's not understanding the product well enough, misspeaking to a customer on certain things, and just, sort of overdriving your headlights.
Yeah. And, look, we've seen that, right? In Tim's case, with SolarWinds, right? Yep. It's interesting because that SEC complaint is so much about what did he know about the products, what was the product security. And part of the statements that Tim was making in the context of that was about how good the product was, right? So when you look at that, like, do you take any lessons out of that for yourself? And like, what are the things that you're learning from that, saying like, this is what I really need to be mindful of going forward?
For me, it's the architecture of the product and making sure that my engineering teams are deeply embedded in the product development lifecycle. So for me to be able to speak about our product, it means I need to trust people that report directly to me, that they've evaluated that product, that they've done the penetration testing, that it's been architected to our standards, so that I can speak to that.
Okay. One of the challenges, right, is that, like, we've always talked about security by design, and the product seems owning that function. How does that change, if at all? Because you're talking about your engineers on your team.
Yep.
Versus product engineers on the product team. How does that change? Like, how do you make that work?
So the way we make it work at Kroll is we have a dedicated security architecture team that reports to the CISO. And I think that it's important that they have that they're empowered to make decisions and that they don't report to the product team. So they can be, brutally honest about concerns that they have without concerns that they're going to get pushed by product. It's, product generates revenue. Product a lot of times, can be it is often a very huge priority, but at the same time, you've got to have somebody who can speak honestly to the CISO and say, these are what my concerns are, so that I can help them address those.
So clearly you're empowered to do that at the organization. Like, where does that come from? And so, like, now think about if you're going to coach a C-suite team or even a board on how to, like, think about this problem from a governance perspective, because a lot of what you're talking about is organizational change. How are you, like, what's the conversation that you're having in that regard to help them understand what is, to many, a very nuanced difference between whether those engineers live on your team or whether they live in the product team?
So it's a very deliberate decision. I report to our chief legal and risk officer, Ed Foreman at Kroll, and that is done very deliberately so that risk is managed by the head of risk for the organization. He reports directly to our board of directors. So there's nobody in IT or product between me and the CEO. And I think that's an important distinction.
Okay.
A lot of organizations will potentially have a CISO reporting into a CIO and also have product. And that can work, but it comes with challenges as well.
Yeah. So now put yourself in, like, a prospective CISO's role or shoes. So now let's just say, and I know you're not, but let's just say you're looking for a job. If you're in that role now, looking at an organization, what do you want to be thinking about when you're interviewing for that job and saying, like, is this the role I want, right? So, like, there's some good roles and there's some bad roles. And I think there's a tendency for people who want to become a CISO and are not yet at that level to want to jump at a job to get the title and to be in the role and have the responsibilities. But talk to me about what you're worried about. Like, what are the pitfalls? What should prospective CISO candidates be asking? What should they be trying to understand to determine if it's the right fit?
I think the number one thing is, what is the role, right? Like we've already talked about, there are 3 different types of CISOs, and they can be any combination thereof. It's what your skill set is, right? If you're a technical CISO and they're looking for a compliance CISO, that may not be the right fit for you. If they're looking for technical and product and you have those skill sets, that might be the right fit for you. So I think really understanding the role of the CISO as it exists. And the other part of it is the CISO role is continuing to evolve at almost every organization. Right. So it's understanding the vision for that CISO's role. So there's a lot of organizations that may have a compliance CISO that they want to move into product, or they want to move into more technical engineering roles. And it's understanding and what the view of the organization is of the evolution of that CISO job and function.
what advice would you give? So you said you report to Ed Foreman, who's the head of legal, right?
Yeah.
So now talk to me a little bit about, as a CISO in those roles with all those different potential responsibilities, what do your conversations look like with your boss in this case, right? With legal in particular, like what are some of the areas that you guys are having more conversations around risk, and what do those sound like?
So all of our conversations are around risk, and it's what we've been working on most recently is breaking our risk into bigger buckets. So what are our, it's not the 10 things, the 10 individual factors. We're trying to put all of those risk factors into a specific risk. Like this is our network risk, and these are the contributing factors. This is the product risk that we have, and these are the contributing factors. And we're trying to distill those big bucket risks into things that we can educate the board about and that we can educate our CEO about. So we're really working on what does that 30 or 50,000 foot view of risk look like for the organization.
And it sounds to me like there's a translation process that's going on here. Like you've shifted from talking about the technical side to talking about it in the context of risk, right? Which, and tell me if you agree or not, but that sounds like it's a lot more easier for your supervisor, the person you're reporting into, to understand than to understand all the technical nuances of what we've been talking about just before, right?
Absolutely.
And so what can CISOs do to kind of digest and make that translation, right? Particularly like whether it's legal or whether it's their CEO or their board. Talk to me about what they should be doing to translate the technical operational sides that they see to risk, which is much easier, I think, to understand for the executive team of the board.
Sure. And I think about it in the terms of search warrants. Back in the day when we were working on criminal cases, we would have to write a technical search warrant that a judge who is not technical can understand. Right. And I use that analogy a lot because that's what I do every day, all day. I take all of these very technical factors and distill them into something that's quantifiable, right? I need to be able to tell the board, I need to be able to tell our CEO, this is the risk in a non-technical way. We have this network risk, we have this product risk. This is what we need to do to mitigate that risk. If we don't, here are the potential consequences from a reputation, from a monetary perspective. So it's really trying to take as much of the technical out of it as I can without taking all of it out. And a lot of times it's also education. So if I think about how I talked to the board 4 years ago versus how I talk to the board now, it is a much more tactical discussion.
So tell me that's super interesting to me. Like sort of how has that evolved? Two questions, right? Are boards getting more technical in their ability to understand some of the conversations that maybe 3 or 4 years ago they didn't have the tools to understand? And then how are you thinking about when you're talking to the board about those risks, how are you thinking about building those technical things and so you can build that awareness? So like talk to me about how your role in communicating with the board in particular has changed.
So, I think boards in general are getting more technical. Both existing or legacy members of boards are getting more technical, and then younger, newer members are coming in who are just inherently more technical within the various boards. So from, my role is every time I talk to them to get just a little bit more technical. I'm not trying to break down the bits and bytes and that kind of stuff, but getting them to understand some of the higher level concepts is really one of the critical things that we work on. It is important for them to make risk-based decisions because there are higher expectations on boards now as it relates to cybersecurity.
So the SEC for public companies, right, has emphasized the need for board members to be adept at understanding that. Have you seen, and just talk about in terms of growth, they want a disclosure of like who has this expertise, who has cybersecurity expertise, which is difficult to find on existing boards and difficult to find to get onto a board with all the other things that board members need to do. Talk a little bit about how you've seen your own board evolve or boards evolve. Do you think you really need that? Is that really a skill set that's necessary given if a CISO does what you've just described you've done? Is that really something that's necessary for the board to be able to appreciate what cybersecurity risk is?
It's hard to say. I think yes and no. If you have a board that is interested in the technology and then having a specific cybersecurity person, I don't necessarily think I would agree with that. But I mean, we do get technical. We talk about vulnerabilities, how our vulnerability management program has functioned, improved over time. That's one example of what we did at our last board presentation. And and they understood that there weren't issues. And I think that's a correct level of sort of knowledge there. Granted, I'm not there when they have discussions and I'm out of the room. So I think having a very technical person on the board that can evangelize, maybe answer questions if they didn't want to ask me specifically. But I don't think it's going to change either. I think the requirements for that technical role is just going to continue. And at the end of the day, it's going to be about accountability, right? When we look at, there is more and more sort of demand and requirement for accountability at the C-suite, at the board level.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate your conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.